I love Kirby Star Allies. I love it more than any other Kirby game. It's my favorite first-party game on the Switch so far, and is probably in my top 5 favorite games ever, up there with well-renowned names such as The World Ends With You, Alchemy, and Hollow Knight. I have a shrine dedicated to Star Allies. I just really, really love it. So now you're probably thinking, what? You mean that painfully middle-of-the-road game that everyone just uses as a punching bag for the Kirby series' faults? And my answer to that is, yeah, yep, yes, that's correct. When I was first getting into Kirby as a series, it was just after Star Allies' release. I was familiar with the series, but hadn't sat down to play through any of the games fully myself, besides bits and pieces of Superstar Ultra and Kirby's Adventure on WiiWare when I was like 10 years old. My friends were freaking out about the brand new Kirby game, which honestly confused me a bit. I thought, what's so special about Kirby that makes people freak out so much? Isn't it just kinda like the same thing over and over? Says the Pokemon fan. This got me curious, and after some persuasion by said friends, I decided to give the series a go. I started by revisiting Superstar Ultra, practically blind since there was so little I remembered. From there, my interest in the series only grew. I then played Triple Deluxe and Adventure, and eventually set my sights on the latest game, that being Star Allies. Now, I definitely already considered myself a Kirby fan at this point. The games were charming and fun, short but sweet, and they felt all full of love. However, it wasn't until I played Star Allies that I really got invested. The game's story in particular is what captured me, but I fell in love with the world, the characters, the art direction, and just the way the game felt. It felt so comfortable to play. The game even had a domino effect on me that led to me creating art consistently again after not for a little while, and making lots of friends along the way, who I'm still close with today. My Kirby friends, I love you. I'm doing heart hands, but you can't see them. Since I got into Star Allies a few months after launch, I went on in blissful ignorance for a few months. However, I soon came to learn about the game's somewhat middle-of-the-road reception. Critically, most reviews of it put it at around a 7 out of 10, which of course isn't terrible, but is lower than the series' other highs such as Robobot with its 9s. Of course, critic reviews aren't everything. A common critique from fans was that it was pretty lackluster, lacking in any substantial content that made the player want to come back for more upon completion of the main story. There is also the whole bare bones on release but added content and later updates thing that it did, which I do have thoughts about, but it definitely hurt the game's reception. This, combined with the somewhat boring level design and easier gameplay, it looked to be a hard among fans, which honestly is very fair. However, in more recent discussions, notably since the release of Forgotten Land, I've noticed much harsher views of the game come up. I've seen people that consider it a stain on the franchise, claiming it ruined the reputation of 2D Kirbys. I've seen some consider it the worst mainline Kirby game. It's worse than the two games it's sandwiched between, Robobot and Forgotten Land, and therefore is unforgivable sin. Which is really a stretch, and also a strange phenomenon. I think Star Allies is in the opposite of the honeymoon phase. What would that be? Divorcing phase? Yeah, fans are in the divorcing phase. The new game that came out is much better received on launch than the previous one, so therefore the previous one is bad and we don't talk about it. In fact, half of the Forgotten Land reviews I've read have to shoehorn in the good old Kirby has had a rough transition into the Nintendo Switch, and just take the opportunity to dog on Star Allies. Like, okay, I guess it's relevant, but come on, man. At this point, anytime I see any praise for Star Allies, it's usually prefaced with, well, the game sucks, but... like people are afraid to admit they liked any part of it. And considering how inoffensive most of its flaws are, it's pretty bizarre to see discussion surrounding the game devolving into this. So, after seeing one too many stupid takes on Twitter, I find myself here, writing an essay on why I like this 7 out of 10 game that not too many people care all that much about. So, why do I like it? That's what I'd like to delve into here today. The biggest and honest answer to this is I have extreme personal bias. However, I have plenty of other reasons, such as how chock full of charm it is, how much character the game has in its design, its world building, and the characters themselves, the accessibility and low-stakes feeling it has while playing, and the way it feels like a love letter to fans of Kirby, and a send-off to a long-lived era of the series. Before I begin, there is one thing I want to make very clear, and I'm going to be serious about this for a moment. The purpose of this video is not to convince you that the game is good. It's not to convince you to worship it, as I do. It's not to defend genuinely faulty game design choices. It is, however, to offer up the perspective of someone who does love it, despite any of its possible faults or shortcomings. I'm not here to bootlick, I'm not here to kiss butt. I just want to talk about something that I'm really passionate about. If you're looking for a mean-spirited debate, or here to scoff at me for daring to enjoy something you don't, or something that you think sucks, this video is probably not for you. Obvious spoiler warning for Star Allies, but also for nearly all other main series Kirby games. Forgotten Land is discussed, but any major spoilers are avoided. Well, okay, no turning back. There's a lot I'd like to discuss, so without further ado, here's why I love Kirby Star Allies so much. Oh my god, is the title screen music always really loud for anyone else every time you boot up the game? Okay, anyway. First, I want to lay the groundwork and talk about the game at a somewhat surface level. Kirby Star Allies is a 2D platformer game exclusively for the Nintendo Switch, developed by HAL Laboratories and released on March 16, 2018. The game's main story mode revolves around a mysterious group of villains whose ritual has gone wrong, scattering dark hearts across the galaxy, possessing many of Kirby's friends. However, Kirby himself lucks out and receives a friend heart instead, giving him the ability to instantly befriend, almost, any foe he encounters. After being rudely awakened from his nap, as usual, he sets off to find the source of this interruption and stop it. The game's main gimmick revolves around making friends, using the aforementioned friend heart ability to build a team of up to 3 additional allies to help you in your adventure. You solve puzzles, clear bosses, and even combine the powers of your allies to create different elemental variants of your standard copy abilities. You can also all work together to move around the environment in new ways, such as in train formation, building a bridge, or rolling like a boulder in a weird circle. The biggest draw of this gimmick, however, is Dream Friends, the ability to call on a variety of popular characters from previous Kirby titles. This includes the likes of fan-favorite Adeline from Kirby 64, who had not had an appearance in a game since 2000. And evil bastards such as Dark Meta Knight, who has apparently chilled out enough since Amazing Mirror to just hang out with Kirby and draw some funny pictures in crayon. In story mode, Dream Friends are called upon in the Dream Palace, so you can build up a dream team and set forth on an adventure of your choosing, until one of your allies keeps getting squashed by walls because the AI is kinda stupid and you can't revive them when they die like that, so you have to exit the level and go back to the Dream Palace to get them back, but you realize you can't use it twice in a row without clearing a stage, so you go back to a different world to go to that Dream Palace and... lightheaded. As for playing through story mode itself, it's fine. I like it. I personally love the story and its antagonists. More on that later. But the campaign itself is quite short, clocking in at just around 5 hours. It's also pretty simple, and you can get through it without really breaking a sweat. It's also like 20% of the overall Star Allies experience, but accounts for 100% of the game's reviews. Go figure. But yeah, there's a lot more to Star Allies outside of the main story campaign, like Chop Champs and Star Slam Heroes. Okay, nobody cares about these, including myself. It's kind of fun. Like, once or twice. Okay. Next we have guest star, Star Allies Go. I'll be calling it guest star from now on. The token sub-game mode that is essentially a condensed version of the main story campaign, only with a different goal in mind. What makes this one different from DDD Tour or Meta Knight's Revenge is that you can choose from 37 different characters. That's every playable character and ally in the game. The mode is also extremely short, with a run through the mode typically lasting about an hour. It's a smart little bite-sized version of the game that lets you pick it up at any time and experiment with a new character. I've clocked in over 160 hours in the game, and I still learn new things about allies by playing as them in Guest Star. Guest Star gives the player room to experience each character to their fullest in a little mini-adventure, which I find to be a brilliant solution for the sheer amount of characters this game offers. You likely won't get around to playing as all these characters in story mode, so Guest Star exists as an opportunity to play around with any of your choosing. What makes Guest Star even more special is that it includes every Dream Friend, and every Dream Friends run includes throwback stages, where stages from the character's origin game are recreated in Star Allies. For example, Magolor's Guest Star run features another Dimension-styled stages, modeled after stages from Return to Dreamland. Playing these stages and recognizing the levels they're modeled after was such a fun experience to me. It really felt like a nice nod to fans of each character's respective game. Guest Star is a fun way to just jump into the game at any time and get a little fix of it. It feels inviting and replayable, something that I feel like is missing from other similar sub-game modes in other games. Honestly, it's a very underrated feature of the game. Plus, the end of this mode introduces a new knight character named Morpho Knight, who has quickly become significant to Kirby's lore and popular amongst fans. Additionally, the battle theme that plays when you fight Morpho Knight changes depending on if you're playing as a Dream Friend, usually becoming a remix and/or medley of past final boss themes. Next, we have the Arena, or as it's called in this game, the Ultimate Choice. Normally in Kirby games, the Arena is a boss rush mode that challenges you to fight every boss in the game in a row with limited healing and ability choices. It's similar here, except in the Ultimate Choice, the player now has, a choice. You're able to select a difficulty level, which dictates the amount of bosses you face, and in some higher difficulties, the amount of health you have and the efficiency of the healing items provided. In this mode, you can choose any character, similar to Guest Star, and can build a team of up to 4, or you can go solo. In this way, not only does the mode itself provide different levels of challenge, but the player can self-impose a challenge by opting not to use allies or abilities. The true Arena equivalent is called Soul Melter, which is a fantastic name. Oh, also Kirby makes the funny anime face for it in the menu, which pits you against the Token Soul version of the final boss. I do not want to admit how long it took me to beat this for the first time. Soul Melter was the game's biggest challenge and overall its finale, until the game received one last update. And now, for the true gem of this game, Heroes in Another Dimension. This is a canon post-game mode that was added in the game's final update in late November of 2018. The mode directly follows the events of the main story, which is unusual for the series, as sub-games are usually retellings or non-canon. In this mode, Kirby, alongside every single one of his Dream Friends, traverses through another dimension with the goal of locating the story's main villain after his disappearance. More on that later. This mode is pretty much a direct answer to many of the game's common critiques. You play as each Dream Friend in their own designated section of the mode. This allows for each respective section to be designed with one particular character in mind, which gives room for the game's most involved level and puzzle design. You're encouraged to explore each playable character to their full extent to discover all of their abilities. This even includes experimenting with combining element abilities with Dream Friends, some of which completely change up the character's moveset. This allows each character to be showcased to their full extent to the player in a way that may not have been seen before. The mode itself is also a really good challenge. In order to achieve the true ending of this mode, and thus of the game, you must collect at least 100 of the 120 available friend hearts scattered throughout various dimensions, which is pretty easily missable in your first run. I managed to get exactly 100 on my first round somehow. I didn't know how many you needed, I just got really lucky. The mode also introduces a boss at the end of each section, which pretty much resulted in the equivalence of a Kracko and Wispy Woods soul, which is great. By the way, they made Wispy Woods a challenge. That alone is impressive. It also wraps up the game's main story by serving as a conclusion to the villain's arc. And in retrospect, it was also the precursor to the conclusion of Kirby's own story in his 2D era. The conclusion itself, however, lies in Soul Melter EX! This is the game's true arena, the true Mega Final Ultra Omega battle, as the game says. It actually requires a button input to access on the Ultimate Choice difficulty selector. Up, A, and minus, which is the same input required to play the original Dreamland on hard. This mode is not a joke. It is by far the hardest challenge in this game, combining bosses from Heroes in Another Dimension, powering up regular bosses, and of course, leading up to the ultimate, real, actual final boss battle. It's the final step before finally concluding the game's story, and you have to work for it. Of course, it can be made somewhat easier with the use of certain Dream Friends, but if you want to give it a shot without any cheap tricks, you've got to really try for it. I tried to beat normal Soul Melter with no allies or abilities, and I was able to beat it in just a few tries. And then I tried Soul Melter EX for a solid week to no avail. It's a great conclusion to the game, and even gives a proper ending to the final boss itself. So the next thing I want to cover here is the design of the gameplay. I'm no game designer, so take what I say with a grain of salt, But I will say that the critique I see of Star Allies' level, boss, and puzzle design choices are critiques that I often agree with. So I'd like to discuss these and give my thoughts on them, and share why I still hold this game in such high regard while holding this criticism of it. There are also a few things I'd like to praise the game for in this section too, so don't worry, I'm not going to get all doom and gloom on you here. Also, I'm going to be speaking in the context of the main story campaign, unless otherwise noted. One of the most important things to keep in mind for this game is that it was designed to be a local multiplayer experience first. This greatly shows, as many puzzles and sections of the levels require multiple allies, from just one additional one for the purpose of an elemental power-up, to an entire team of 4 for something like a friend circle. Now, of course, this is not the way most players will experience the game. If someone sits down to play a multiplayer game with local friends, a platformer is usually not the first choice, unless you're me. So this presents a problem. More often than not, people are playing this game in the way that it wasn't mainly designed for. Of course, this doesn't make it unplayable, but it does hinder the experience a bit. That being said, this game is really fun with friends. I like working out puzzles out loud, even if they are very easy, and taking on bosses together. It's always a hit with my friends, even those unfamiliar with Kirby, which is always really fun to see. Now, if only the game had online and just let me play with my friends from around the world, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. Back to single player. The game still does force multiple allies at points, even if you are playing single player, which feels like you have to occasionally halt your progress in the level to stop, throw a friend heart at an enemy, wait for another one to spawn, throw that, etc., and then you can continue. The ally mechanic doesn't always come naturally. I find it more fun to be running around with a party of 4, even if 3 of them are CPUs, but sometimes I just want to fly solo. And it comes to the point where I'll sometimes skip puzzles and sections entirely if I know I have to spend time looking for an ally. There's also sections where you are required to have either 2 or 4 party members to enter the door to an area, which then puts you at the mercy of the AI, which has its, quirks, and sometimes makes it a bit of a chore to get through these sections. As for the game's puzzle design, it's Kirby puzzle design. Usually, the enemy-based puzzles will consist of a room with 2 conveniently placed enemies and a big thing to solve. Like a room with a chain that's on fire that's blocking your way, and there's a cutter and dribbly there. Like, okay, I get it. But there are some weirder ones that require unexpected inputs, such as anything involving stone. Like, there's no way I would know that ice and stone makes me into a curler, or that ESP and stone makes a giant floating statue that I can control. That's the reason that these in-game guides exist, but those also just straight up will tell you how to solve every puzzle. So it's either keep them on and know everything, or turn them off and just kind of mess around to learn a new combo. This can be fun, but it's also kind of why is this the basis for a puzzle? I would rather be learning this new combination while playing through the stage, whether it be on an obstacle or an enemy or something, and from there I could apply it to this puzzle. I feel like it alone isn't the best basis for a puzzle. It effectively teaches the player these combinations, but that's not much of a puzzle per se. I'd like to sidetrack for a second and go back to the aforementioned ability combinations, called friend abilities. This is kind of this game's sub-gimmick, and I absolutely love it. Trying out different weird combinations with base abilities was one of my favorite parts about playing the game for the first time. It's crazy to see how much a simple ability's moveset can change entirely based on the added element. Fire Yo-Yo and Ice Yo-Yo feel totally different from one another. Also, I mentioned stone earlier, but it's crazy how fun of an ability they made it through those weird combinations. It's a great gimmick, and it feels more controllable than the more chaotic ability combos of 64, since they have a more predictable outcome. But they still have fun, unexpected possibilities. No hate to 64 copy abilities, by the way, I think they're weird and funny. Back to puzzle design, I want to talk about a part of the game where its puzzle design does shine. Heroes in Another Dimension. I could gush about this mode endlessly, it just does so many things right. The puzzles and challenges in this mode aren't just all simple, isolated rooms. Most of them are woven into the stage itself, requiring you to use your available resources and think creatively. Combining the level design with elements of puzzles really made it engaging and felt like more of a challenge. It also felt more rewarding. They're all built with one single playable character in mind, alongside a specific set of allies at your disposal. This allows the puzzle's design to be catered to that specific character's ability, which pushes their movesets as far as they can go and allows the player to discover these abilities. The puzzles themselves are much more innovative too. Some of the puzzles involve memorization or precise timing, some both. Some combine these with weird niche moves from playable characters. One of my favorites is a puzzle involving DeRoche and lighting 2 fuses, but having to extinguish one in order to access the treasure chest, but still keep it from falling off the stage. It's a fun combination of having to examine your surroundings well, make full use of a character's abilities, and testing your timing. It's not insanely hard or anything, but it does feel very rewarding to figure out, and it also does take a few tries to get right if you're going on your first run. And when you do get it, you think, oh, I'm so smart and cool for doing that, which is something I felt was missing in the main story. There are also some real clever elemental and enemy-based puzzles that I felt like were a big step up from those in the base game. For example, Susie with the wind ability allows her to fly in her mech. While flying, the arms of the mech act as a blade, able to cut through chains. Instead of being told this, unless you check the pause menu screen like immediately after getting the wind ability, the game sets you up with a section right before this one that requires the mech, a wind enemy, and a puzzle that 1. Cannot be jumped to inside the standard mech, and 2. Has chains to be cut. It sets you up to think creatively and in a way that feels more rewarding than the base game. Like, instead of learning you can make icicles with water and ice that rewards you with a 1-up, you learn that this robot armor can fly and acts as a sharp spinning top, and you get a plethora of those super sought out friend hearts. That's what I like! My point is, Heroes in Another Dimension crafted effective puzzles by both making them more integrated into the stages themselves, as well as setting them up more creatively. Plus, they're more of a challenge. I wish the base game took some similar cues, but hey, for what it's worth, the game did get it right eventually. Back to the main story campaign. Like all other Kirby games, the game has a main gimmick ability, which this time around is friend actions. This is the aforementioned bridge, train, and circle, as well as the friend star. It's kind of a whatever gimmick to me. It feels better than like the super abilities in Return to Dreamland or Hypernova and Triple Deluxe, as those were kind of just stand there and wait after pushing a button. At least this time you get to, I don't know, do things, though it isn't even a lot of things. Friendstar is definitely the most fun one, as it acts as a little airship. It even incorporates copy abilities, and it shoots off different projectiles depending on who's piloting, which you can switch around. The others are just press A sometimes, or move the stick sometimes. In all honesty, most of these types of gimmicks in Kirby games just don't impress me. The exception to this was Robobot armor, since that just felt a lot more fun and intuitive. I also enjoy mouthful mode, since it was more integrated into the stages themselves. Friend actions are very middle of the road for me. There's one more type of design I'd like to talk about here, which is going to be the game's boss design. I don't think there's much wrong with the boss design of this game, and a lot of fights do something clever. But it is somewhat of a downgrade from the 3DS titles. The boss fights in this game don't really take advantage of the foreground and background that much, like how Triple Deluxe and Robobot did, other than a boss occasionally moving back there just to move across the screen, as opposed to teleporting. It's fine, but again, I felt like the boss fights during the main story in the 3DS games were a bit more engaging, but of course that has its faults too. Pyrivet. Then there are some bosses that genuinely just suck, and by some bosses I mean Pawn and Con and Goldon and Solvox. I just hate having to fight them over and over again in Arena and Guest Star. I just have to sit there and wait. And oh my god, just make it stop. Let me do something interesting, please. On the other hand, there are more clever fights as well. Though a fight like Grandmam wasn't exactly memorable, it was cool to see the gimmick incorporated into a boss fight outside of the final boss. Plus it had some elemental elements to it as well, which was a nice touch. The boss itself is pretty whatever, but hey, it has some good ideas. Then there's cool and charming ideas like fighting 4 Meta Knights with an unusual moveset, buff DDD in general, fighting 2 Crackles at once. The game really succeeded at shaking up some staple Kirby boss fights and doing something new, weird, and fun with them. They gave Wispy Woods a peepaw. The end of the main story and in post-game is where the bosses really start to get fun. Highness's fight, oh, we're so close to being able to talk about this in full, is one of the most out there fights from a conceptual standpoint, with having the entire first phase of the fight being a fake out and then catching the player off guard with an incredibly over-the-top second phase. Then there's the final boss fight against Void Termina, which does a series first of making use of full 3D space. Unless you count the overworlds from this game. This fight is fantastic, from theatrics, variety, gameplay, spectacle, everything. The third phase is probably my favorite just because of how much variety it alone provides in its moveset, and how Soul Melter and Soul Melter EX build on that, ramping up the difficulty and taking these ideas as far as they can go. Switching between 2D and 3D spaces for different phases help shake it up too, so you're not just kinda stuck doing the same thing the whole time, like in Star Dream's fight in the main story in Robobot. That fight is incredible, don't get me wrong, but it is just kinda dodge, aim, and shoot most of the time, until the true arena. Anyone else, like, still really scarred from that final attack it does at the end, where it just instant kills you if you're not expecting it? Then there's the final phase of Void Termina, which brings in so many ideas from previous boss fights throughout the series. It's a great final spectacle for 2D Kirby. Post-game then further expands on multiple boss fights, both in the form of Ultimate Choice exclusive variations, as well as Heroes in Another Dimension bosses. The final boss of Heroes in Another Dimension is against 3 characters at once, which absolutely melts the Switch's frame rate, and it is fantastic. It tasks you with keeping track of multiple boss patterns at once, and it is not easy by any means. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. They also added a Mark's boss fight in the credits for Heroes in Another Dimension. Just full-on Mark's fight from Superstar, playable inside a credit sequence. Why? I don't know, but it's great. It's so fun. So there's some good, some not as good. I have a lot of praise to give it, but still have my own critiques of it. So why do I still love the game so much despite it being such a mixed bag in terms of design? Truth be told, I just don't really mind some of its faults, personally. I mean, sure, there are things that annoy me, but my overall experience with the game never really felt hindered by some annoyances or things that could have been done better. This is entirely just personal preference too. I know the level design isn't very intuitive, but I just don't care all that much, as long as I'm enjoying myself. So how do I enjoy myself in the face of faults? Well, for one, just playing the game itself just feels so nice to me. The amount of charm this game oozes and how ridiculously cute it is enough to make me happy while playing. Like, sure, Friend Train isn't super exciting, but oh my god, Bandana Waddle Dee's eyes sparkle when he leads the train, and it's the cutest thing I've ever seen. And look at them run! Oh my god. It's also just a very inviting and welcoming game. It's a nice game for me to play for a little bit, just to unwind. I kinda just turn off the brain for a little while and enjoy running around a volcano while playing as a hamster. It's great stuff. I find it hard to get stale too, considering the sheer number of playable characters alongside all the different combinations of abilities and moves at your disposal. Plus, Guest Star gives you the perfect excuse to jump into the game for just a little bit. To put it briefly, it just feels good to play. Playing it makes me happy. Engaging with it makes me happy. Making this video essay, it's making me happy. That's one thing I value so much about it. Okay, so if you know me, you know what's coming. If you don't, I'm going to have to give a huge bias disclaimer that I will get out of the way right now. The villains of this game, these guys, see these guys? These are my favorite characters of all time. I've spent an unbelievable amount of time over 4 years analyzing them and outright just being obsessed with them. I admit it. As such, I do have an unshakable bias for them and this game's story. But I will try my best to put aside any personal theories unless noted as such, or anything aside, and instead want to focus on their characters as part of the narrative and story. That being said, I'm going to be geeking out really hard, so just be warned. Actually, yeah, those warnings from before, the like more on that later thing, yeah, later is now. A lot of praise that this game does receive is the sheer amount of lore, story, and world building we got from it. Not just for Star Allies itself, but for Kirby as a series. But there are already a bunch of videos and analysis pieces about that out there, and I'm not great at adding anything new to that conversation. Something I don't see discussed much, however, is the game's overall narrative. Maybe this is because it's Kirby and not a piece of classic literature that we all had to write a paper about in high school, but I do think that this game has a really beautifully crafted story and message. Not to be like, actually it's super deep, but like, there is more to it than what I see people talk about. So let's talk about it. So first, let's just give a basic overview of a surface level story. From there, we'll delve deeper. As mentioned before, the story begins with the villain's ritual going wrong and scattering dark hearts across the galaxy. This villain is Highness, the leader of an evil cult called, they never actually gave a proper name to the whole villain group. I'll call them the Jambandran cult. The dark hearts were from the Jamba Heart, which serves as a vessel for the god, or Dark Lord, the cult worships. What we see in the opening cutscene of the game is Highness attempting to resurrect their Dark Lord, but he somehow screws up the spell and instead makes the vessel explode. Along with it, the 4 spears containing the vessel also explode, which is where the pink friend heart that hits Kirby comes from. So the ultimate goal of the game becomes stop the evildoers from doing evil. Pretty simple, but it gets a little more fun. As the story progresses, you meet Highness's underlings, a trio of nuns called the 3 Mage Sisters. In order, they are Francisca, the Ice Wielder, Flamberge, a Fire User, and Zan Partisan, a Lightning Mage. Zan Partisan is the leader of the 3, while Highness is the leader of all of them, as well as all the lackeys like the Jammer Jabs and Jam Believers. And yes, the Waddle Dee equivalents are named Jam Believers. The 3 have been tasked with gathering the Dark Heart pieces and returning them to Highness, so that he may correct the ritual and properly awaken their Dark Lord. You fight them a few times throughout the story, each showing their own distinct personality through their fights, until you finally reach the end and meet Highness, who is, by the way, completely out of his goddamn mind. It's kinda comical, but it's also so jarring. His speech patterns are completely unpredictable. He has a lore dump that quite literally just goes by way too fast for the player to be able to read in time. And then there's the fight against him, which I briefly touched on earlier, which shows the full extent of this guy's madness. After a suspiciously easy first phase, the real fight begins when you knock off his hood and he is revealed to be a very odd-looking guy under his mysterious cloaked look. He even goes as far as draining the mages of their consciousness and power and uses them as live weapons. It's really one of the more disturbing things in the Kirby series, especially from a psychological standpoint. After Highness is defeated, he then performs a live sacrificial ritual. What game am I talking about again? Where he tosses the unknowing mages into the still incomplete Jamba Heart, eventually sacrificing himself at the end in a desperate last resort attempt to resurrect their Dark Lord. And it works! And then we finally get the finale of this story, meeting this Dark Lord face to face. Okay, standard scary monster, that's cool. Oh god, okay, its face fell off. Alright, now it's a Kirby final boss. Oh, we're inside of it now. Is that its heart? We have to tear apart its heart? It's a bird now. Okay. Are those Marx's wings? Zero Two's wings, maybe? Is that the Master Crown? This has to be, this is the last phase, right? No? Okay, back to inside. Oh, of course it's not. Kirby's face? This fight is just so ridiculous. The payoff is so worth it. It's a culmination of what the game has been building towards, but it's also a tribute to final bosses of Kirby past. It's a great conclusion to this game's story, and seems to be well liked, even by those who otherwise were unimpressed with the game. So, what is set up on the most surface level context possible is that there's this crazy cult led by this crazy guy who wants to revive his Dark Lord and destroy everything. And all of this is true, and gives you a basic understanding of the game's story, allowing you to follow it and understand it well enough. However, like all Kirby games, there is more under the surface. But, unlike some of the previous titles, you don't necessarily need the quote-unquote under the surface to understand what on earth you're looking at. Something like Robobot failed to do this and ended up making the whole endgame sequence pretty confusing. In fact, the devs actually hosted a Q&A on Miiverse, and so many of the questions were about basic story elements, like, is this major character, like, actually this character? Which is not a great sign. It's absolutely possible to tell a story that leaves room for interpretation or has some vague parts without it being difficult or downright annoying to try to follow. Kirby hasn't been the best at this since trying to adapt heavier stories, but Star Allies is definitely a big step up from the storytelling of Triple Deluxe and Robobot. Forgotten Land also excels in this. There's a surface level story that you can understand easily, with more underneath the surface for fans to seek out. Next, I'd like to talk about how exactly Star Allies builds its story. The way Star Allies approaches its storytelling is a slow build. Of course, it does the classic Kirby thing where things take a complete 180 at the last minute, but the transition into it felt a bit smoother this time around, while still delivering a surprising outcome. The game sets up immediately that there is something more sinister at play than DDD stole all the food again, even though that's what Kirby seems to believe upon waking up. A good bit of dramatic irony to set up the story. However, you don't get to formally encounter that quote-unquote something sinister until the completion of the first two worlds, when the villain ship, the Sebastian, crashes into Popstar. There, you finally get to meet some of the game's antagonists. It isn't too early, but it isn't super late in the game either. The first one you encounter is one of the three mage sisters, Francisca. She's pretty vague with her dialogue, only mentioning their most twisted of visions, and explaining that she needs to gather the Dark Hearts for that vision. She doesn't clarify what that vision is, or what's actually going on. It's a nice setup, making you want to learn more. The next mage encounter is with Flamberge, who comically almost exclusively attacks you only because you attacked quote-unquote sweet Francisca. So she doesn't really provide any more context to their motives. She does, however, reveal that the villains may have a caring relationship with one another. To an extent, at least. Side note, in the original Japanese text, instead of comparing Kirby to toasty marshmallows in this line, she compares him to Hellfire, and how it would feel cold compared to him. So far we've established that the three mages are working towards an evil goal, must assemble these Dark Hearts to achieve that goal, and that they also seem to have a bond with one another. Okay, so that's something, and that's just from the first two. The last encounter in this world is with Zan Partizan at the top of the Gym Bastion. At this point, we finally get an actual name drop for their boss, Lord Highness, with Zan stating that it is his will that Kirby's defeated. After her fight, we get a nice bit of characterization for her, when she decides to stab the energy source of the entire Gym Bastion, with the goal of having Kirby killed as it self-destructs. She's kinda scary and seems to be a bit reckless. From there, you fight each mage once more in the final world before finally reaching the climax of the story. And once you get there, it feels like it's been a natural build-up. You've seen the Jambandra base in the distance throughout the whole final world. You understand that these mages are doing the biddings of their leader, and that they are up to no good. So once you get there, you're expecting some evil to be waiting for you. But it somehow subverts your expectations with just how nuts the climax actually is. When you finally meet their leader, Highness, the guy who's been talked up by all the mages as their, quote, beloved liege, it just feels incredibly unsettling. The music that plays, his movements, his slow speech at first. I mean, one of the first things he does is notice Zan on the ground in front of him after being defeated, and instead of offering help like a beloved liege would be expected to do, he instead just bats her aside, rendering her unconscious. It's absolutely not what you would expect to see in a leader after being played up as so great by the mages, particularly Zan. He then delves into his long speech, yeah, I've been all over all of this. So the game sets up the storyline, you're able to follow it, and it does so in a smooth way. But at the same time, in the end, your expectations are subverted, and it goes completely off the rails. We also finally learn what their goal was. Oh, they have an actual god that they worship and were trying to resurrect. That's the twisted vision that Francisca mentioned like 10 boss fights ago. Everyone else kind of just mentioned either wanting to help Highness carry out his goal or wanting to protect one of the other mages. Actually, that's odd. Why is that? Was that just an oversight while writing the game, or is there more below the surface? I think we know the answer to that. Another way Star Allies tells its story is through world building and environmental storytelling. The story builds up at the end, and the worlds and environment change alongside it, scaling appropriately. There are only 4 worlds, which is unusual, but each world feels either bigger in scale or at least more important than the last. You start in the standard Dreamland world, and then once you defeat DDD and realize there's more going on beyond DDD is being a chump again, you set out to investigate all of Planet Popstar. The next world occurs when the Jambastion, the villain ship, lands on Planet Popstar, taking up an entire chunk of the planet. This is when the levels begin to feel a lot more alien as well. Strange shapes and color combinations make up the stages. It also gives you a scale of how big these Jambastions are, by showing it in the first level of the world, growing closer as you progress through the stage. It feels like you're progressing towards something big, and you are. Then, once you make it through to Jambastion, you're sent into the final world, Far-Flung Starlight Heroes, the biggest world in any Kirby game, sending you deeper and deeper into space as you progress. The planets you visit begin to feel much more alien, with environments that feel unlike anything on Popstar. The environments in this game, by the way, are so beautiful. The bosses get a bit stranger, even the music that plays in the overworld changes, getting more eerie as you progress. You're progressively getting farther and farther from familiarity. At the end, you reach Jambanja Base. You'll notice things orbiting it. Oh, those are all Jambastions! Look at how tiny they seem! And how they took up a whole 5th of Popstar! It really makes you feel small. The game's scope, as well as environments themselves, just get bigger and bigger until it all culminates at the end. The pacing of it all is just fantastically done and helped to immerse me in the game's world. Another form of indirect storytelling and character development the game does is through the story's boss fights themselves, notably the mages and Highness. Francisca's fight is slower paced, but her attacks feel like they have a lot more force behind them, showing how strong she is despite her maybe seeming unassuming to the player being the first of the mages you fight. Flamberge's fight feels a bit more bold and frantic, fueled by both passion and anger. Her moves feel like they happen a little faster than Francisca's, but in turn, they almost feel like they pack a little bit less of a punch, since she's wielding a more lightweight sword rather than a large axe. Zan Potterzan attacks with a lot of quickness by using her spear. By the way, she swings her spear, which is very much how you're not supposed to wield a spear. Her attacks are very precise and feel deliberate, and she's able to pull off a few surprises by taking advantage of her quickness, showing her skills as a leader. However, she has multiple attacks that leave her pretty vulnerable to the player more often than the others. Highness, when by himself, is very weak, slow, and has attacks that are easily dodgeable, almost as if he isn't even used to fighting, or is actually not all that skilled in combat. However, when relying on his minions as meat shields and battering weapons, he becomes much more difficult to fight, with trickier patterns and a few moves that you need to strategize around. It's a fun way to give these characters a little bit of personality outside of just their dialogue. Speaking of dialogue, actually, did you know that each of them have their own little unique text splits when they speak? It's a nice little detail that gives them more of an individual character. Highness even has different font for his dialogue. Then, after the story is concluded, we are left with a bit of room for interpretation. If you're used to Triple Deluxe or Robobot, you would expect the main villain, in this case Highness, to die violently on screen while their underlings watch in horror. However, this isn't the case this time around. Instead, we see Highness and the 3 mages ejected out of Void Termina mid-fight, after being seen hanging inside its body, presumably being used as a form of its life force. They fly out into space, and then that's it. We don't see them again, unless you count non-canon appearances in The Ultimate Choice and Guest Star, and neither of these modes further build on their characters or give them any EX forms. So what happened to them? I want to know more! This really unusual lack of a conclusion to their story was perhaps the biggest hint of a continued story further down the line, in the form of the game's final update. It also really made me want to learn more and made me very curious about these characters. Like, okay, I see all this crazy stuff on the surface, but there's clearly a lot more going on. Like, why is Highness so invested in this Dark Lord? Why are the mages so invested in him, despite him acting so harsh towards them? What's their story? How did they come to this? And you can understand a story just fine without these things, but knowing all the whys really helps supplement that story if that's something that you're looking for. And that's where the game's lore and narrative come in, which provide the answers to all these questions we've been left with. Now, it's time for me to truly delve into madness. You know Highness's lore dump rant? That's about to be me, but instead it's me talking about the game's narrative instead of talking about, like, my dark god or whatever. So, to start, what on earth happened before the events of this game? How did this weird cult thing form, and why are they the way they are today? All of this, by the way, is going to come from flavor text throughout the game, either pause screens or dialogue, or from developer quotes. Okay, here goes. Long ago, Highness's people, whether it was his ancestors or him himself is unclear, were wielders of magic. They lived alongside science users, and they seemed to be on peaceful terms with one another. These are popularly theorized to be the Ancients, a long-gone group of science and magic users that may have ties to Magalur from Return to Dreamland. One day, a quote-unquote galactic crisis came about, and Highness's people were able to put a stop to this crisis. However, in turn, the science users ended up betraying the magic users and sealed them away at the edge of the galaxy, presumably over fear of their power. Somewhere in this time, whether that be pre- or post-banishment, Highness met each of the mages one by one. Each of them were on their deathbeds when Highness found them, Franziska about to freeze in a snowstorm, Flamberge being caught in a fire and nearly suffocating, and Zam being struck by lightning, which, according to the Japanese version of the text, may have interrupted her own suicide attempt. When he found each of them, he was able to save their lives by granting them magic of the element that almost brought them to their doom. Each of the mages then swore an oath of loyalty to their new liege for saving their life and granting them this power, vowing to follow him. From there, Highness led the trio. In the past, he was a much different person than what we saw in the story mode of Star Allies. His goal was to lead them, himself, and his people to, quote, paradise. Whether that was originally related to the whole Void Termina thing or not is not very clear. He harbored genuine care for the mages, and the mages returned that feeling. At some point, again, unclear when, Highness learns about Void Termina through, quote, the Book of Legend, again, another thing we know nothing about, but that's not that important. From there, he begins to worship Void, possibly using it as a guide towards paradise. However, a desire for revenge against those who betrayed him and his people soon overtook his genuine feelings, and he began to seek to resurrect Void Termina in order to have it carry out his plans for revenge, which involved wiping out the whole universe. It seems that unlike other Kirby villains, Highness's spiral into madness was self-made instead of being influenced by something possessing him. It was at the fault of people who betrayed him and his people, but he ultimately spiraled into evil by his own accord. This sets up a different story than the other games. Instead of the main villain being exclusively a tragic figure, he does have some genuine malice in his heart. The mages still followed him through his madness, as they already had sworn loyalty to him. They did this despite him completely losing his grip on reality, and even becoming abusive towards them. He even forgot Zanpartizan's name, which is played up as a gag in some spin-off media, but is actually genuinely sad in context. Eventually, Highness is able to obtain Void's vessel, and thus begins preparing to resurrect him. All of this happens over an unknown amount of time, but essentially once he obtains the vessel, that is where the story of Star Allies begins. A disclaimer: the next part of this video, from the end of this section through the narrative section, is going to involve a lot of speculation for me, and introduce my own read on the game's story and themes. So don't take what I say as a fact, but do take it as an analysis. This is a surprisingly thorough backstory for such a short, unassuming story mode like what Star Allies has. And I think that this story works kinda perfectly for what this game is about. There is a little more about these characters that I would like to analyze before I go into the narrative discussion, so bear with me for a moment. So, given all this crazy stuff about their past, what exactly are their true motives? From what I can gather, throughout the story of the game, instead of the mages being in on this big plan for revenge, they are more so in on this big plan for Highness's sake. They also have a goal of protecting one another. This becomes much more apparent in their dialogue after learning about their backstory. Flamberge only seeming to care about protecting Franziska while slacking on the Dark Heart gathering isn't meant to be a gag about Flamberge being lazy or distracted. That's her genuine goal, to protect the ones she loves. That's where her fiery passion that we see comes from. Not from a desire to see the world destroyed. but from a desire to keep those she cares about safe and ensuring that Highness is able to fulfill his goal and exact revenge on those who hurt him, no matter how grim it may be. Franziska, on the other hand, does actually speak of fulfilling a dark scheme, though she is the only one of the mages to ever mention it. This maybe betrays a bit of a cruel personality from her. But, like Flamberge, she is so clearly in it for the other mages in Highness. In her second encounter, it's mentioned that her duties have kept her away from the others, particularly Flamberge, and that she misses her. She really does care about the others, and similar to Flamberge, just ultimately wants them all to be safe and for all of this madness to end. This becomes even more apparent in Heroes in Another Dimension, but I'll hold off on that for now. In fact, whether or not Flamberge or Franziska fully agree with the idea of awakening Void Termina, or if they even want that, is for sure questionable. And then there's Zan Partizan, my personal favorite of the trio. Zan arguably shows the strongest loyalty for Highness, almost exclusively talking about wanting to ensure that his wishes are fulfilled, or about protecting him. The lengths she goes through to fulfill his orders are extreme, including the whole destroying the Gem Bastion even if that means destroying resources and possibly even wiping out a chunk of their own army thing. She's the one to stop you right before you reach Highness in the same room. And she's not just in it for Highness either. She has a cute bit of characterization where she refers to Franziska and Flamberge as her, quote, darling Frenny and Burge, showing a particular closeness with them as well. As for Highness, it's clear what his goals are by now. His sights are set only on exacting revenge, which has driven him to total madness, even to the point where he seems to be unable to discern the mages from something like inanimate objects, seeing how he bats Zan aside and uses them all as weaponry in his fight. But we do know that he wasn't always like this, and his ambitions became warped somewhere along the way. A lot of this is revealed in the post-game mode, Heroes in Another Dimension, which, oh god, I haven't even touched on in the story section yet. But there were also indications of such pre-Heroes in Another Dimension, such as this quote from the series' director, Shinya Kumazaki, which states that Highness, quote, forsook his own heart and fell into darkness, implying his heart wasn't always clouded by malice. Additionally, a pause screen for Highness seems to depict a past conversation between him and Zan where he apologizes for being unable to remember her name. Plus, the mages have to have some reason to be following him so closely, right? So, wow, okay, that's a lot. Kirby tackled monarchies and fleeting love in Triple Deluxe, capitalism and the loss of family in Robobot, and now religious death cults and unhealthy attachments in Star Allies. It's amazing how each new one seems to one-up the last so consistently, but it does. And I think that this story works so perfectly in Star Allies in particular. Star Allies, at a surface level, is a game about friendship. The main thing in this game is being friends with everyone. Kirby is friends with people who tried to kill him. These are all of Kirby's dream friends. Here are the ones who did not try to kill Kirby at any point. Yeah, only a few of them. Star Allies is defeat evil with the power of friendship turned up to the absolute maximum. So, in order to contrast that, we have a story of these people who are close with each other, and remain close to one another despite their situation becoming genuinely unhealthy and dangerous, as well as the genuine care the mages had for Highness becoming one-sided. Highness saved the mages' lives out of kindness, as this was presumably before he had ulterior motives. Yet, in his madness, he ends up eventually taking advantage of their unyielding loyalty and uses them for his own ambitions, despite that never originally being his goal. What happens when a bond formed out of genuine care turns so sour? When does it stop being considered a friendship? And is something like that still salvageable? Does someone like Highness still deserve a shot at friendship, even after everything? Are the mages justified in having faith in him? My proposition about the game's narrative is that Highness is meant to be a narrative foil to Kirby. Okay, stick with me. I promise this makes sense. Kirby is a character that is full of heart. He is given this strange new power to instantly make friends in the beginning of the game, but it's not just his newfound power that does this. Alongside this, with the friends he makes, he treats them as allies, as equals. You work together with your allies throughout your adventure to overcome any obstacle and work towards a common goal. Kirby is fair and kind to them. Mostly. Your friends follow you because they want to. This also includes dream friends. I'm not really sure if there's any special lore about the Dream Rod itself, but it does allow Kirby to call upon characters from past adventures. Basically, all of these characters were characters that Kirby had left off on at least somewhat good terms with a few exceptions. But even in cases like Marks or Dark Meta Knight, according to their pause screens, they still seem to trust Kirby enough, even if they still have their own motives. In the cases of other characters like Taranza or Susie, who were out for Kirby's head the entirety of their games, they eventually came around to Kirby because they saw that despite their awful treatment of him, he still offered his help to them in the end. Kirby shows a genuine kindness towards those he encounters, and in turn, people express kindness back. That's kind of what dream friends are. a showcase of just how important friendship and kindness has been on all of Kirby's adventures this far. So, in a whole game centered around friendship, we have our villain, who approaches friendship in the exact opposite way, even if it is due to his madness. Any original feelings of genuine kindness he had have dissipated, and he now takes advantage of those who trust him and care for him. He uses their loyalties as a tool for his own personal gain while completely disregarding them as people. The way he leads is much different to Kirby. Kirby is a leader because he makes sure everyone works together, is treated fairly, and are working towards a common goal. Highness is a leader because he has established a hierarchy among himself and the mages, using the friendship he showed in the past to establish himself as the leader. Even if they were friends in the past, they are now simply partnered by duty. Kumazaki even brought up the stark contrast between Kirby and Highness. The story shows the contrast between a team of friends who are full of heart and Highness, who forsakes his own heart and falls into darkness. I've used that quote twice now, but it's just a really good quote. Maybe the most obvious example of Highness being in total contrast to Kirby is at the halfway point in his second phase, when he forms a friend circle with the mages. Which, by the way, caught me so off guard when I first played and made me genuinely angry. I was like, man, you can only do that with the people that you're nice to! And I was right! Kirby uses these friend actions in a lighthearted way, where all 4 allies work together to make a formation and overcome obstacles. Highness, on the other hand, uses the friend circle to attack Kirby, and he forces his allies into it while they're unconscious. Oh, it is going to be hard to conclude this narrative section on a good note, but I promise it does. Oh, another cute little detail. In the music that plays when you first encounter Highness, you hear this melody. Which is actually a slowed version of the track that plays in the stage-friendly field. And, wouldn't you know it, Friendly Field is his first stage that you use Friend Circle in. Yeah, it's very funny. The game plays up friendship as this all-encompassing thing, this power that we have, that it's possible for friendship to prevail even among some of Kirby's nastiest foes. And then we are presented with this guy, who misuses the friendship that is offered to him in the absolute worst way possible. It's a great setup, and even after everything, Kirby and the power of his friends still prevails. Kirby's friends overpower Highness's because whatever his version of friendship is at this point isn't actually friendship anymore. Kirby defeats them and then puts a stop to their Dark Lord, all with the help of his allies and the powers offered to him by them. And so, after watching his god be vanquished in a matter of minutes, Highness is left to rot in space forever, knowing he messed up horribly and will never be loved again. No, I'm just kidding. That wouldn't exactly be the greatest note to end a game about the power of friendship on, now would it? Amazingly, this game ends with a happy ending for Highness and the mages. As I mentioned before, the main story ended on a vague note, leaving their ending up to interpretation. For now. Before Heroes in Another Dimension came along, we did get a hint from Kumazaki about their fate. If you watch the cutscenes during the final battle, you'll see that Highness and the 3 generals survive. It could be quite interesting to sit back and speculate about what might become of them afterwards. I think after battling Kirby and his friends and seeing their friend power in action, Highness may have had his eyes open to certain things. In retrospect, this was a pretty big teaser for the future, both confirming that the mages and Highness' story wasn't quite over, and that Highness may actually be open to change. Then, after a long build-up of updates and teasers, we end up at the conclusion of the game's story, Heroes in Another Dimension. Is it clear that I absolutely love this mode by now? Because I do. In this mode, which takes place after the events of the main story, Highness ends up disappearing, falling into another dimension. Inside of Another Dimension are scattered friend hearts, left over from the spears that originally contained Void Terminus' vessel before Highness accidentally obliterated it. Kirby journeys into Another Dimension in order to try and find the missing Highness, and along the way, collects these lost friend hearts. Once you finally get to the end of the mode, you encounter Highness, who is trapped inside of a Gemba heart. The 4 spears that you gathered throughout the dimensions break the Gemba heart open to reveal him inside, except he is somehow even more of a shadow of himself. His title is now Fallen Efficient Corrupt Highness, implying that he now is under some sort of influence. My own personal theory on the matter is that the malice in his own heart grew so much that it has now turned into something physical that consumed him. His pause screen states that the darkness left its master, transforming into a giant Gemba heart and swallowing him whole, the master in question being Highness. I really think he managed to accidentally physically manifest a Gemba heart that trapped him and completely overtook him. The first phase of his fight is extremely eerie too. He has no dialogue before fighting him, and he is silent while he attacks. No weird grunts or anything. That changes at the second phase, however, once you knock off his hood. This time, instead of summoning the 3 mages, he summons... wooden logs that are dressed like them? This is likely because he is unable to call on the mages in his current state, but this is such a hilariously bizarre choice that it really just made me burst out laughing the first time I witnessed it. Just another small thing that makes you think, what on earth is wrong with this guy, as well as keeping it relatively lighthearted. Once defeated, he is knocked to the side, and in come the three mages. Their appearances have been altered as well, but they don't seem to be under any form of corruption. I think this was purely a design choice, just to show that they are in their quote-unquote EX forms, and to make them more distinct from their standard fights, as we also see them in these palettes in Soulmelter EX. I don't think it was a lore-related decision. In this exchange, we get some particularly interesting bits of dialogue, notably from Franziska. She says, "Oh, look at you, you're not the same Lord Highness we once knew," and then quieter, "Oh, but for the glorious old days when you led us toward a bright future." This is a huge drop that essentially confirms all the hints we got before that Highness was originally a good guy and had pure motives. It makes it all the more upsetting that the mages are still chasing after him, even after the horrible events of the main story, in hopes of saving him. And maybe that's what they were doing all along, just attempting to save him and bring back his old self. In fact, that's definitely what they were doing. And then they find him here, totally corrupted, defeated by Kirby. So, in one last clash to, quote, repay their debt to Lord Highness, the three mages attack. All at once. Well, technically two at once. But this fight is just unbelievable. The Switch quite literally cannot handle this fight, the frames per second just tanks. This fight is the full extent of their power, their rage, and their devotion. And once it's over, you defeat the mages, and then you leave them and Highness in another dimension to rot for their sins. Not actually. That's the bad ending, though. In the good ending, Kirby takes the power he gathered throughout another dimension and uses it to befriend the three mages, reviving them from their defeated state. The mages return to favor by saying a prayer that lightens the area they are in and providing a warp star to Kirby to return home with. This, of course, leaves Highness behind, still unconscious on the ground, overcome by corruption. Kirby and his friends hop on the warp star, and we get one more bit of characterization for the mages. Flambridge waves goodbye to Kirby enthusiastically, Franziska looks to Kirby with a hand over her chest, and Zan Partisan averts her gaze from Kirby, staring at the ground. While Flambridge expresses gratitude and Franziska seems to be pondering the situation in her own way, Zan seems to be feeling a sort of grief. However, it isn't quite the end. As Kirby flies away on the warp star, one last, very small, piece of a friend heart floats off of the star, and ends up landing on top of Highness. This awakens him and returns his palette to normal. Franziska and Flambridge quickly rush over to his side, while Zan takes a moment to shake herself out of her own head to notice that her liege is even alive. The final shot shows her joining the other mages next to Highness and presumably explaining what had happened, with Highness nodding in understanding. A lot of people seem to read this scene as an instant, quote, redemption for Highness, but I personally read it as a sort of starting over for him. The friend heart he was hit with was far less powerful, so I think what it did was just expunge the physical darkness that was consuming him, and, along with it, whatever hatred and madness he had left over. With that gone, he's kinda just a blank slate now. And so, after everything, Highness and the three mages get their happy ending. A few more in-game images show this, such as the image for the ending of the Three Mage Sisters guest star run. Oh yeah, I guess I forgot to mention that they unlock as dream friends after the true ending of Heroes in Another Dimension. And the 100% reward for collecting all hearts in another dimension. With the sickeningly sweet title of Let Them Know We're Happy, accompanied by a beachy remix of the Mage's battle theme and a snippet of Highness's. And for the 3rd anniversary of Star Allies, they even released another illustration depicting this scene. Oh, it's so cute! It's a pretty thorough happy ending, and they make sure to hammer in the fact that, look, they're happy now. Check it out. See? Look! So, why on earth did Highness, of all characters, get this happy ending? After everything he put the mages through? And the answer to that, to put it simply, is that it fits the game's overall theming and message. You probably get it by now that this game is about friendship, and that these villains did used to be friends before things got bad. So why not give them another chance at friendship? It's yet another instance of friendship powering through in the end, showing just how important good friends can be in improving one's life. We can argue all day on whether or not Highness, quote, deserved this ending or not, but I feel like that just kind of undermines the themes of the game. It's also important to understand the context of the piece of media we're talking about here. Guys, it's Kirby. The game about a cute and powerful puffball full of love. It's also a very fantastical setting. Kirby befriending former bad guys and abominations against God's creation isn't anything out of the ordinary for his world. It happens like twice a week. In this setting, where it's possible to fix things with a big pink heart and a little love, why shouldn't any character get a second chance at happiness? Oh, but then what about characters like Queen Sectonia from Triple Deluxe, or President Haltman from Planet Robobot, whose lives were cut short despite them going mad for reasons that weren't their own fault, and were instead due to some sort of possession? Why didn't they get their happy endings? And for that, it's a matter of what type of story those games wanted to tell. Terenza's story in Triple Deluxe is a tragedy, unexpected for Kirby, but still very much possible. Susie's story is also a tragedy, but in a different way from Terenza's, as it dealt with the loss of family. The Mage's story was almost a tragedy. It could have been. Given their motives, a happy ending for the Mages would not be possible without a happy ending for Highness as well. So that's probably partially why he got a chance at one. But also, something like Kirby is a much different type of story than something with more serious, grounded themes. Despite a lot of the serious implications in the story, it's still a strange, fantastical world. And despite being a pretty despicable character throughout the game, Highness is still presented in a cartoony and fantastical way. We can't examine something like this game the same way we would analyze something like, I don't know, Breaking Bad. Something else to consider is how nicely a conclusion like this wraps up their specific story. Their story began with Highness giving each of the mages a second chance at life, being the one to save them from their doom and give them something new to live for. And their story concluded with the mages giving Highness a second chance at life, following him into another dimension to save him, and being there for him even at his lowest point. From the moment they all began their new lives, both Highness and the mages, they were right there for one another. It's just such a nice little parallel, and it makes my heart swell. And that's what Kirby's all about. Kirby Star Allies is a conclusion to an entire era of Kirby. A 30-year-long one at that. Well, I guess it was 26 at the time, but you know. Having a happy ending that places emphasis on the importance of friendship is appropriate for such a conclusion to a series that is all about that. It gives closure to not only characters from the story, but to many other characters throughout Kirby's adventures. Each of the Dream Friends even got their own little closure to their characters, or at least continuations, showing what they're doing now after their story's conclusion, and their pause screens for guest star. Friendship, forgiveness, and closure. 3 very powerful things, especially in Kirby's world. And that's what we see in the story of this game's villains. In the fantastical world of Kirby, these things are always possible. So why not let the bad guys be happy for once? Oh, and I haven't even talked about Void Termina yet, have I? So speaking of parallels and foils to Kirby, how about that final boss, huh? The lore of Void Termina is not something that I want to get too into, as it's something that 1, I still haven't been able to fully grasp myself, and 2, many people have already discussed, and I have nothing new to bring to the table in that regard. In short, Void, not Termina, but Void, the ball thing, is an all-encompassing being that essentially is, theoretically, the source of all matter in Kirby's world. When met with negative energy, such as Highness's desire for revenge and the Dark Hearts, it creates something like Void Termina, or even something like Dark Matter. So Void isn't inherently an evil or malicious entity, it just became that in the case of this game after exposure to overwhelmingly negative energy. In contrast, when met with friendship and positive energy, it can create something like, I don't know, Kirby. Yeah. Our implication here is that this guy may just be the origin of Kirby himself. This is driven home through the pause screens throughout the different phases of the fight, but also the fight itself. Void makes similar faces to Kirby's, creates attacks that are similar, if not identical, to previous bosses throughout the series. Something like this is a brilliant final boss for a game that serves as a bigger conclusion to the series thus far. We're finding the thing that Kirby very well could have originated from. And it's terrifying, but also amazing. There's other neat details in this fight, such as Void being able to befriend your allies for itself and having them attack you, though it's more like a possession situation than is not actually befriending. It's also partially damaged just by throwing regular old friend hearts at it. It's not a lot of damage, but it does hurt it. Then there's the finale version of the boss, Astral Birth Void, which introduces itself with the Hyperzone from Dreamland 3 in the splash screen. The score for this boss fight is also very notable, as it begins with the standard 4th phase version of the fight, but soon becomes a much more melancholic version of the Green Green's melody. At one point, the melody becomes 8-bit, replicating how it sounded in the original Dreamland on the Game Boy. The fight feels surprisingly somber despite how intense it is. It even ends with Void actually smiling as it's being defeated, as if relieved it gets a new chance at rebirth. Once you defeat the Astral Birth version of Void, you then unlock one last little thing. You get Kirby's classic design as a new skin for Kirby in the game. This is a total theory, so take it with a huge grain of salt. But a lot of fans like the theories that this classic Kirby is Void reincarnated, as it somewhat matches what's implied in this pause screen. The final battle at hand, Void takes his first steps towards a new age. In place to tyrannical rage, will he find nap time? Gentle breezes? Treats? He may even dream again, a dream of friends reunited. I like this theory a lot, as it further wraps up the story, giving truly everyone a happy ending and a chance at friendship. Now that all of that is out of the way, I want to talk about some of the smaller things I love about this game now. Beyond this game's large-scale flashiness and theatrics, there's a lot of small little details that I find to be so fun. These aren't all exclusive to this game, of course, as the Kirby series is well known for doing stuff like this. But I think that this game in particular embraces these small details so well, and in a way that helps make this game feel like a true celebration of the series thus far. And that's what it is, something that embraces the series' history and shows some love to every corner of the series. There is so much extra content and little details packed into the game that I will definitely be missing a few points here. However, I'd like to touch on a few of my favorites. First, we have the game's collectibles, which are puzzle pieces. These somewhat continue the tradition of the last two games, where the collectibles are callbacks to the rest of the series, but it feels a little more special this time. Rather than reusing old stock art, the puzzle pieces make up large, full illustrations of various characters throughout Kirby's history, with illustrations for each mainline Kirby game as well as illustrations for all the new Dream Friends. Some of these illustrations are by artists on the Kirby team, such as this one by Riki Furman, and this one by Shinya Kumasaki. However, some of the illustrations are by guest artists, such as this one by Yuji Kaida, an artist who has worked on very high-profile titles such as Godzilla and Transformers. These little illustrations are all so sweet and full of heart, each with its own unique art style that showcases characters and moments throughout the series' history. Then there's these little skits that happen on the main menu. They made 117 unique skits and interactions that just play on here, and it's adorable. Some favorites include DeRoach stealing the lore Star Cutter from Magalore, and Flamberge protecting a frightened Francisca from fiery enemies. It's a really cute detail, showing a bunch of different interactions between characters that have never interacted before. Also, 117 is a lot of these things, especially considering how little time one would usually spend on the main menu. Unless you're like me and just like to stare at them. Maybe one of the biggest kisses blown to old fans of the series is the aforementioned Classic Kirby skin. It's cool that there's a reward for 100% completion in the first place, and what a cute and worthwhile reward it is. They even gave him like the weird leg stubs and permanent puffy smile. Perfect. No notes. Then, of course, there's the Dream Friends, just as a concept. Of course, this is a major form of fan service, but it just feels so genuine. The characters all have fun movesets that reference their origin games closely. Susie has her little helicopter thing to fly, while Dark Meta hides in a mirror when he guards. Magalore has his gem apples from Kirby Clash. Gooey gets dark matter orbs when he flies. DeRoach can call on each of the squeaks in just one move, depending on how much it's charged up. It's just these little details and callbacks that give them all so much unique character. Each character feels like a little portable version of their entire origin game. And no two Dream Friends feel even remotely similar to one of each other in terms of gameplay. This includes Meta Knight and Dark Meta Knight. Both have super different movesets and play in totally unique ways from one another, despite their extremely similar appearance. Beyond just the level of detail in their movesets, they even gave each character their own motivations or reasons for joining up with Kirby. For some, it's as simple as, Kirby is my friend, which is all that's needed for them. For others, there's actually a few that follow their stories, such as Terenza, who is apparently seeking the altar at the Divine Terminus in an attempt to see Queen Sectonia again. As for the introduction and release of Dream Friends, each Dream Friend was built up to with little puzzles and hints throughout social media. These weren't the most difficult puzzles or anything, but the idea was to encourage fans to interact with it and get them excited. Also, all the future Dream Friends were leaked way beforehand, but it was still fun to watch for official reveals. They even had hints in the base game for Dream Friends. Two of the new copy abilities, Spider and Artist, were hints for Terenza and Adeline, respectively. Dream Friends were done so thoroughly and executed so well, and it just felt so fun to have the excitement about this game last for as long as it did. Even when I played 4 months after release or so, I felt like I was still able to join in on the excitement. Oh yeah, and there's also the little bonus stage you unlock after clearing the main story. There's not much purpose to this other than it being a fun little bonus, but I do want to draw attention to the ending of the stage, where the game applies a Game Boy filter and recreates the first level from the original Dreamland. Which, you know, this isn't the first time Kirby's done this, but it's still cool. You then end up in an area which has a statue rise up from the ground, and as it rises from the ground, your controller will play Green Greens through its rumble. Here's a video of it. I have no clue how they pulled this off, but it's very fun to me. Then there's this game's various Easter eggs. Again, something every Kirby game has, but I really love some of the ones in this one in particular. First, we have the standard hall rooms, which are fun as always. Then, there's the bonus rooms in each Dreamfriend Gush Star run, that features the character's name written in blocks, and yet another remix of their origin game's music for them. Most of these are pretty hard to miss if you're doing all the puzzles, but in particular, the Mages one is pretty obscure. Once you do find this one, beyond just a standard bonus room, featuring an unfortunate typo of Flamberge's name, you actually get to visit the same room from the bonus stage of the main story. This time, however, the food that rains down from the ceiling is actually representative of the Highness and Mages, as it rains the same food that they each drop when they are freed inside of Void Termina. Another additional Easter egg with the Mages is, after unlocking them as Dream Friends, you get a chance for them to appear in the sound test room and theater, instead of the standard enemies. Some other Easter eggs I like include being able to throw a friend heart at certain bosses upon defeating them and befriending them, the little crown that the Kirby on the life count wears once you reach the maximum number of lives, which is 999 by the way. It's a lot harder to get than it sounds. And the hidden portraits of Dream Friends scattered throughout various stages. I haven't even found all of them. There's also background Easter eggs in the overworld, such as Shadow Kirby flying by in the background of the Gym Bastion, Ripple Star visible in far-flung Starlight Heroes, and more. Not Easter eggs per se, but I also adore the little art that displays whenever you clear a Dream Friends Gush Star run. They all show each respective wave of Dream Friends hanging out together, showcasing some unlikely friendships and interactions. It's a very sweet detail, and it's hard to choose a favorite of these, really. Just kidding, it's this one. A lot of these Easter eggs are really unique to this game, and I love all the various callbacks and little extra bonuses. Given the sheer amount of detail, this game truly does feel like a love letter to the entire series. There's something there for everyone, I think, with little nods and details everywhere. It shows just how much HAL loves their own series, as well as how much they seem to appreciate their fans. Okay, all that's fun and all, but there are still some glaring flaws and criticisms about the game that I've left unaddressed up until now. So I'll take this time to talk about those, as well as give my thoughts on them. Alright, gushing time and fun time's over, just for now. It's back to being a little more serious, just for a little bit. The first and maybe most common criticism I see is that the game is short and easy, which is a pretty funny criticism for a Kirby game. That's every single Kirby game. Okay, but this game is too short, and it's too easy. Okay, sure, let's take a look at that. The main story of Star Allies is 40 stages long. This is the same number of stages as Forgotten Land. Triple Deluxe and Robobot have 42 stages, just barely being in out by 2 additional stages. But admittedly, it does feel shorter, and it does actually take less time to beat. So why is this? I think the reason it feels shorter is the pacing. It's 4 worlds instead of the typical 6-ish, but the last world is a super long one, spanning the length of about 3 worlds. But you arrive at the final world much earlier than expected, which makes you feel a little further along than expected. I also think the stages themselves are probably shorter. For collectibles this time around, there's only 1 or 2 per stage, a big rainbow puzzle piece, and in some, a switch that unlocks an additional stage. In previous games, there are typically 3 collectibles per stage, plus other things, so each stage will have a bit more to do in it. This also means the number of puzzles in the stages are reduced, as there are less collectibles to find. That considered, it probably explains why Star Allies' stages seem shorter, and are shorter. All that being said, the main story still is only about 20% of the entire game. Going for 100% in this game will probably tack on an additional 10-ish hours, depending on how quickly you go through it. I took my time with it, and it probably took me around 20-ish hours total, maybe 25. So not exceptionally long, but definitely shows that there's much more beyond the main story. Though, of course, interest in the game beyond the main story does have to be earned. If the main story of the game doesn't interest me all that much, or give me reason to come back, I usually won't go for any additional content. I imagine it's the same case for many players of Star Allies too. As for the difficulty of the game, it's a similar case where if you want higher difficulty, you'll have to look outside of the main story, in places like Heroes in Another Dimension or Soul Melter EX. And, again, interest in that content first needs to be earned by the game. On the other hand, when thinking of seeking out a challenge, Kirby isn't exactly the first thing that comes to mind. Kirby games are usually for when I want to flip my brain off to Do Not Disturb for a little bit. And I don't mean this in a bad way either. Easy doesn't mean bad. Short doesn't mean bad either. And Kirby games can be challenging too, but it's almost always in their post-game modes. Or in the case of some retro games, just the regular game. Of course, that doesn't mean Star Allies couldn't have stood to be a bit more challenging. None of the boss battles, despite being creative and fun, really ever made me struggle too much. I probably died once or twice, but I really can't remember. On top of that, your allies, namely Dream Friends, can just wipe the floor with bosses. So you can impose a bit of a challenge, if you can call it that, by opting to not use your allies. But then you're missing out on a really fun part of the game. So yeah, I get it. But in the end, I, personally, just don't care that much. I'm not really playing Kirby for the challenge aspect, if that makes sense. But I do understand the criticism. Perhaps the biggest criticism that this game faces, as well as the elephant in the room, is that it follows the recent trend in games where they were released with a lackluster amount of content, with promises of free updates in the future to supplement the game further down the line. The purpose of this being to extend the lifespan of a game that otherwise may not hold much public interest for long. I understand the thinking behind this model, and it does work in some cases. An example of this would be something like Splatoon, a multiplayer experience. Not only do consistent and frequent free updates give players something to look forward to, it also guarantees the game won't die early on. Since it relies on being multiplayer, it needs active players, and to have active players, the game itself needs to be active. Now let's take a look at another case, like Mario Golf, one that doesn't fully rely on multiplayer for the experience. The game releases with a basic roster and content, with a promise that more content will be added later on via free updates. This is closer to Star Allies' case, as it follows a similar model. The content of something like Mario Golf, however, may not be quite exciting enough to draw players back in if initial interest in the game was low already due to lackluster content. So where does this leave Star Allies? This is entirely my opinion, but in the case of the game, I think it was fine. Not great, not perfect, but fine. I think they actually handle it just about as gracefully as they could, all things considered. And something like Mario, it's like, oh, okay, they're adding Daisy to Mario Strikers. That's cool. Daisy's playable in a lot of games, right? Why wasn't she there in the first place? And then with Star Allies, they were like, oh, by the way, we're adding all of these fan-favorite characters, playable for the first time ever, some without appearances in over a decade, and we're also going to continue the story. The content provided was much more fun and was something that was worth getting excited about, and personally, I think having every Dream Friend there at launch wouldn't have made it quite as exciting. Like yes, we all knew all of the DLC characters from data mining beforehand, but it was the release themselves and the build up to it that was the most fun. Again, this is entirely my personal preference here. I understand the model kinda sucks, and from a corporate standpoint, it is scummy if they're purposefully withholding content. But that's just not the feeling I get from Star Allies using the model. So again, it's for sure a fair criticism that I do agree with to an extent. Star Allies was super barebones at release, even with free content updates promised. And going by that model for sure hurt its reception, as well as its image among fans and non-fans alike. But I think what HAL ended up doing with it made it better off than any Mario sports games or whatever other games may be using this model. So it's really a mixed bag. And then there's also a lot of the more out there criticisms of the game, which have especially begun to pop up more after Forgotten Land's critical and commercial success. A lot of criticism I've seen towards Star Allies just flat out isn't even about the game itself anymore. I've seen stuff like, the game's bad because a lot of bigger name commentators didn't like it, which gave Kirby a bad reputation, which isn't even a criticism. It's just a weird projection of a fan's insecurity about the series. Like, what on earth are you even talking about, man, and why am I wasting time even acknowledging this? And then there's the fair criticisms of the game, such as the length, release model, level design, difficulty, that are used as the basis for it being among the worst of Kirby's mainline games, or just any of the games. Which, okay, I can't exactly argue against someone's own personal preference, but I have to wonder why, when the game has so much more than just that. Other Kirby games have main stories that are short and easy, and then have not a whole lot else outside of that, so if that's the basis, why aren't they the worst? What makes Star Allies worse? It feels like Star Allies really isn't given the time of day anymore outside of main story sucks, LOL, which is genuinely unfair. I'd feel like all things considered the game would be a mid-tier game at worst, considering just how inoffensive its faults are at the end of the day, but that's not always the case among fans. I just disagree with the idea that it's that bad. Again, I feel like we're in the divorce phase here with Star Allies. Maybe 10 years down the line, we'll be seeing some thought pieces on why it's an underrated masterpiece, and I'll be there to say, hey, I did it first. This is not going to happen. But until then, I feel like the general consensus of the game is just a bit too harsh for what it is. so much to celebrate in this game, yet it is still so often looked down upon. It shares similar faults to other games in the series, but is judged harsher for it. It's not like it's widely hated or anything, but there are for sure people who do just detest this game. And it's rare that I hear about anyone else besides myself considering it their favorite game. And if I do see it, they're usually being ridiculed. A bit of a bummer, but it doesn't shake my own opinion. And I firmly hold the opinion that this game's existence is incredibly meaningful for the Kirby series as a whole. Some may argue that Kirby's big debut on the Switch should have been 3D. It should have waited longer. It should have done this or done that. And of course, there's many things that Star Allies could have done better, and maybe should have done better. But I think that, for what it is, Star Allies was a fantastic conclusion to a 30-year lived era of Kirby. In fact, HAL even considers Forgotten Land and Star Allies two halves of one whole. Star Allies concludes a 2D era, wrapping up everything in a carefully crafted, loving little bow. It even first introduces the idea of Kirby in 3D space to us through the final boss. Forgotten Land was able to excel from taking cues from what Star Allies had set up. I sincerely believe that if Robobot was the conclusion to 2D Kirby and we went straight into 3D on the Switch, it wouldn't have turned out just as great as it did. Star Allies allowed groundwork to be placed before delving into full 3D. And though Forgotten Land isn't quite perfect, I think they really nailed it all things considered. Forgotten Land is a fantastic game, and it wouldn't exist the way it does without Star Allies. Both are true. Star Allies is the culmination of all things Kirby up to that point. From its themes, storytelling, world building, charms, secrets, lore, all of that good stuff that we love. It showcases so much of what Kirby is about. And now we're in a brand new era of Kirby. Kirby's 3D now. So what better way to end it off than create something that is a culmination of everything the series has offered us with one last loud and proud hurrah. Understand that a lot of people do find it to be a disappointing conclusion due to multiple glaring faults in gameplay and design, but I disagree so strongly. Star Allies, post-final update, is a thorough game that has something special in store for any fan of the series, new or old. The game is crafted so sweetly, and it's clear how much love was put into this game just by the sheer amount of detail. And it's also clear to me that, despite some horrible online rumors, HAL is definitely proud of what they created. Just from looking at all the concept art from the art book, interviews, the news channel updates through Switch, the amount of detail in the game, it's clear that this was a passion project with a lot of genuine thought and care put into it. Like, you all saw that Star Conquering Traveler Suite, the Kirby concert, right? I lost my mind. They know how cool that is. So, why do I care so much? Especially since I got into the game as such a new fan, why would I care so much about celebrating a 30-year legacy when I had been there for, 4 months? I think most of it is just how much it means to me, personally. And I think I've made it obvious why at this point. I was just so captured by how the game set itself up, the world of it, the characters, and just how loved I already felt as a fan, even as a new fan, by the game's existence. And again, this game is what really got me invested in Kirby as a whole, which I have to thank for where my art is today, many of the friends I've made, and more. I also have it to thank for the mental breakdown I have every time I get a new crumb of content about its characters. Jokes aside, and above all else, I love Star Allies just because it makes me so happy. And that's my final, unshakable argument that my stance on cannot be changed no matter what. It makes me happy. All the love and charm packed into the game is just so infectious, I can't not feel happy while playing it, or even just thinking about it. I love it for the experience I have when engaging with it, for the overall experience it is, which is a huge thank you for everything to those playing it. It's a game, but it's also a tribute, and a very heartfelt one at that. And so I hold this game extremely close to my heart, for the seemingly endless amount of joy it gives me, and for how much it has impacted my own life. So, thank you, Star Allies, for being a game full of so much heart and happiness. There's nothing else quite like it for me, and that's what I find so special about it.